talks of a serial killer.
Another victim of a suspected serial killer.
True, and when multiple bodies are found in the same week in our bayous, we have seen it on social media, people posting, well, there must be a serial killer.
This is the case of a young man who fooled everyone. A creepy serial killer who played the perfect gentleman. He spoke softly, dressed well, and carried himself like someone with a promising future. For a while, it worked so well that even when police looked straight at him, they let him go. The nightmare only collapsed because one woman survived long enough to identify him. On a cold winter morning, December 13th, 1967, Utrecht moved at its usual pace. In a modest upstairs apartment in Haveskrat, a 66-year-old widow named Elizabeth Betje Wordmeyer answers her door. Standing outside is a well-dressed young man who introduces himself as a tax inspector. He speaks clearly and confidently, as if he belongs there. In a time when authority is rarely questioned, his calm demeanor is enough to earn trust. Betje lets him in without hesitation. Inside her home, the atmosphere shifts almost instantly. The man who had just spoken politely turns violent. He strikes her repeatedly and leaves her bleeding on the floor. The attack is fast and brutal. He assumes she will not survive. But Betje does survive. Through pain and shock, she manages to reach her window and call for help. The neighbors respond, and an ambulance rushes her to the hospital. She suffers a severe concussion and a deep head wound, but she remains conscious long enough to remember the face of the man who attacked her. The police act quickly. They show her photographs and she identifies him without doubt. That same evening, officers arrested a 25-year-old man named Hans van Zoon. At first glance, he doesn't fit the image of a predator. Hans is neat, articulate, and composed. He dresses well and speaks carefully. His appearance suggests ambition rather than violence. Even during questioning, he maintains an unsettling calm. However, what begins as an arrest for attempted robbery soon unravels into something far more disturbing. Under pressure, Hans begins to confess, not just to the attack on Betje, but to crimes that hadn't yet been connected. Hans van Zoon, born Johannes Marinus van Zoon, grew up in Utrecht in an ordinary working-class family. His father was a craftsman and his mother a housewife. He was already involved in theft and small criminal activity, moving in and out of institutions as a teenager. Yet none of this fully explains what he became. In his early 20s, Hans developed a skill that would open doors everywhere: charm. He learned how to mirror the expectations of people and present himself as exactly what they wanted to see. He moved easily in cafes and social circles, speaking with confidence about books and ideas. He targeted older, financially stable women. He made them feel admired and chosen. Behind the charm was control. Hans lived with a woman named Caroline, significantly older and financially secure. She later described how he could influence her decisions and manipulate her emotions. She also experienced his violent temper behind closed doors. While living with Caroline, Hans began another relationship in Amsterdam with a 37-year-old woman named Kubi Vandervoort. Kubi was independent and steady, employed at an office near the Prinsengracht. She maintained routines and social plans. When she failed to show up for work after April 29, 1967, concern grew quickly. Friends eventually contacted the police. When officers forced entry into her apartment days later, they found her dead in a scene of extreme violence. She'd been attacked with both blunt force and a knife, which remained embedded in her body. Police in Amsterdam launched a massive investigation. Rumors circulated about a man named Hans. But in 1967, investigations were limited by the absence of DNA and shared databases between cities. The cases remained isolated within their own files. Hans returned to normal life. What investigators didn't realize was that he was living two identities: the charming young man in public and a calculating predator in private. He collected leverage over people through manipulation and secrets. He photographed intimate encounters and sold explicit images. It was all about control and aggression. Around this time, Hans developed a partnership with an older man named Arnoldus Rietbergen, known as Old Noel. Noel was in his 70s and familiar with the vulnerable targets of the city. He knew which elderly residents kept cash at home. Noel lacked physical strength but possessed information. Hans had youth and confidence. Together, they formed a dangerous combination. On May 31st, 1967, an elderly shopkeeper named Jan Donnen was attacked in his small store in Utrecht. Hans entered under the pretense of selling books. He waited patiently, engaging in friendly conversation. When the moment came, he attacked with devastating force. Jan suffered fatal injuries and Hans left with thousands of guilders. The pattern repeated on August 12, 1967, when Hans visited a farmer named Rijer de Bruin in the countryside. This time, he posed as a journalist conducting an interview. He brought a camera and casual conversation. The farmer trusted him, but that trust ended in violence. Hans searched the home and took cash after killing him. Each crime strengthened his confidence. He entered homes under respectable identities and walked away without suspicion. Then came December 1967 and the mistake that ended it all. The attack on Betje Wordmeyer followed the same script: polite introduction, official cover story, and sudden violence. But this time, the victim survived. Here is where you need to pause for a moment. Before we continue, if you enjoy true crime cases like this, make sure to subscribe. This will help me to continue making videos like this. If you already have a theory about what happened next, let me know in the comments. Hans confessed in stages after the arrest. He admitted to killing Jan Donnen and Rijer de Bruin. On December 19th, he finally confessed to the murder of Kubi Vendervoort. He described giving her sedatives before attacking her. He cleaned the scene and returned to Utrecht to establish his alibi. Then came 1969. Hans van Zaan stood trial in Utrecht. The courtroom was filled with journalists and onlookers. He appeared calm, dressed neatly, and showed little visible emotion. His behavior during proceedings often felt theatrical, as if he believed he still controlled the narrative. The psychiatric evaluations described him as deeply disturbed but legally sane. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment for multiple murders and attempted murder. However, imprisonment didn't erase his ability to influence others. While incarcerated, Hans formed relationships again, including one with a staff member who eventually became his wife. Years later, his life sentence was reduced and he was granted early release. He returned quietly to society, living under constant suspicion. In 1998, he died at the age of 57 from complications related to long-term alcohol abuse. The story of Hans van Zon reminds us that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it stands calmly at your door, dressed respectably, speaking softly, and asking to come inside. What unsettles you most about this case? The violence, the manipulation, or how easily trust was used as a weapon? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you in the next case.